Okay, this is my sociological problems presentation on media and body image by me. To start with, what is the problem? Media, especially social media and image-based platforms, amplify narrow beauty ideas and standards, increasing body dissatisfaction, unhealthy food choices, risk for disordered eating, and insecurities across adolescence and youth. Um, Media frequently presents idealized or often edited body images that can become social reference points. I think exposure is also a big part of the problem. It introduces people, especially like I'm talking a lot about young girls, to problems that no young girls should be exposed to at such a young age. Um, right now, I'm also doing a research essay in my media studies class about how the early exposure and like the influence of social media has kind of made girls in a slightly younger generation than me like want to act older than I feel like anyone, any of my peers or myself like wanted to act. Exposure to like TikTok and like certain trends like get ready with me or something has made them. My example that I'm speaking about is like the uprising like young girls going to Sephora and wanting like fancy products, especially like retinol as like an anti-aging when it's like they're 10 years old, and shouldn't have no need for any of that like fancy skincare. Um, that was my example. And interactive platforms, anything with like likes, followers, or celebrity exposure can intensify comparison and feedback loops, and negative feelings. Um, Body image and modern digital media differ from older mass media platforms. Um, and to close, there's also this sense of like false awareness, where we know social media is bad for us, um, and you know that it can influence you in certain ways, but that doesn't protect you from that influence, and that still has negative effects, despite some people knowing that it can have negative effects on their mental health. For who's affected, negative body image and eating disorder risk are elevated among adolescent girls and boys. Social media features and developmental factors create heightened vulnerability in adolescence. And the effects can differ by race, income, cultural background, anything like that. One of my sources describes how low-income African American and American Indian children describe different experiences with body satisfaction and measurement tools. The study found that African American and American Indian children often felt that the standard body image assessment tools like silhouette scales didn't reflect their body type, or cultural standards of attractiveness. And many of them described the silhouettes to be too skinny or unrealistic, and didn't feel they looked like anyone in their communities. That adds to another thing of different cultures, and different people can have different standards or different ideals of like kind of what a perfect body looks like. So that overlap can create certain tensions, and different expectations as well. Um, and both groups, building off of this, emphasize cultural differences in body ideals, some preferring large or stronger body shapes, as opposed to like the universal thin ideal promoted in most mainstream media. In terms of intersectionality, identities combine to shape unique experiences with body image rather than isolating each identity, as we've talked about. For example, like a Black adolescent girl from a low income background will face different and often like compounded social pressures compared to a white middle class boy, due to certain ways that social norms and biases, and cultural standards interact with each identity. And another thing that I'll add is like certain measurement tools that are, um, presented in like doctor's offices early on, like BMI, doesn't reflect bodies act like accurately, and doesn't take in any like medical history other than like your weight and height. And it can give very unrealistic, and narrow like results, in just like a number. And yeah. Um, Briefly, just some keywords that I feel like matter. Socialization. Media acts as an agent that teaches beauty norms and expectations. We're already socialized by so many things, and media, specifically social media, can be so unregulated. So we're in a lot less control of what we're being exposed to. And this kind of exposure enhances social comparison that can bring about like more insecurities. Um, and then lastly, I'll talk about it more later, but symbolic interactionalism, um, and how like media images are kind of some symbols that people interpret through interactions, like comments and likes, and then we internalize those meanings in certain ways. In terms of some evidence, I'm highlighting this visual from one of my articles I read. It was titled The Perfect Storm, a developmental sociocultural framework for the role of social media in adolescent girls' body image concerns and mental health. Um, this model shows like body image issues don't just come from social media on its own. It's a mix of sociocultural pressures, gender expectations, developmental stages. Girls especially are already dealing with like objectification, sexualization, and high pressures to be attractive. And social media more just acts as an accelerator. Most social platforms are highly visual and always on and accessible, giving constant feedback through likes and comments that can make appearances feel judgmental and measurable. And social media can push girls to focus on two things, other people's bodies, like influencers, celebrities, even peers, and then compare themselves to those people. And then it also makes young girls think more about their own appearance, often in a negative light due to this comparison. This leads to self-objectification and a way of seeing your value through how you look. The thin ideal I talked about earlier, internalization, along with body shape and personal dissatisfaction that connects to norms, deviance of the norms, and like kind of this hegemony or beauty norm being presented as natural. And girls interpret media images as symbols of beauty and adjust their behaviors accordingly, which then takes me to symbolic interactionalism, shared symbols and daily interactions, analyzing how images and feedback, like likes and comments, which I keep talking about, produce meanings about bodies. And these media images function as symbols. People interpret them or negotiate kind of meanings and enact roles like certain like healthy eater or fit person. And we internalize certain symbols and certain words like fit or fat to be associated with kind of certain types of people, certain images, and kind of have certain ones that we feel more drawn to versus we associate as like bad or good. Alternatively, other just to present the other theoretical lenses. Conflict theory, beauty standards are produced and maintained to serve capitalist interests by encouraging consumption, whether diet products, updated cosmetics, anything like that. Those who don't have them or like fit the expectation are kind of marginalized. Also bringing in the idea of like the iron cage, the rationalization of like bettering oneself can make people feel trapped in maintaining curated images for likes or validation, even if it harms them. And then structural functionalism. Beauty norms help social order by encouraging conformity at the cost of inequality and stigma. Essentially, like everyone knows what's considered attractive, um, whether we say it or not. And honestly, most times we do say it. And everyone knows what isn't. And that in a structural functionalism argument would create like stability in a way. Um, yeah. How the algorithms intensify the problem. Um, engagement-based algorithms like push this ideal body content because it gets certain clicks. Um, diet posts get certain clicks, like model posts get certain clicks. It's all kind of in this capitalist, like more clicks is more money. The feedback loop, it's, as I said, more exposure, more comparison, more insecurity, more engagement. Um, Platforms often like auto recommend weight loss and fitness content to young users. And having this constant exposure adds this feeling of urgency. Um, yeah. In terms of consequences and effects of this, there's both more smaller, like micro effects, like self-image, daily behavior problems, but there's also more large-scale macro effects, like public health trends, or kind of a burden feeling. On a macro scale, though, there's an effect on industry profits. In a lot of ways, problems with self-image fuels the economy, or at least the beauty and diet industry. When media convinces people that they have to buy all these certain products to fit the norm, um, these media platforms like push these things at people. And it kind of creates solutions to problems that no one would have ever thought of before. So, proposed solutions. Um, to start, media literacy education, which would teach critical interpretation of images, and evidence shows protective effects and moderating of negative outcomes. Um, Positive accountability and content moderation, algorithm transparency, um, reduce eating disorder content, eating disorder adjacent content, um, kind of reduces the level of exposure. Um, Community and clinical supports, more school counselors, body positivity community programs, and access to mental health services to kind of increase transparency. Um, on a larger scale, policy and regulatory measures, like ad standards, influencer disclosure, and age limits for certain content. And lastly, diverse representation. Plus size models, it's been shown reduced dissatisfaction in experiments, and also kind of this common theme and idea of like people feel more comfortable in themselves when they're surrounded by or either exposed to people who look like them in the media. So having that diverse representation kind of normalizes a wider range of images and bodies, despite just or beyond just like the kind of Victoria's Secret style model that I feel like is kind of the trend right now and has been for a while. Um, Going more into the strengths and limitations of these regulations, in terms of media literacy, that, as I said, both builds critical thinking. However, it also may not necessarily reach the most vulnerable users in youth because it requires like resources and trained teachers and doesn't change the exposure to the algorithm or the algorithm itself at all. It just kind of teaches you more about it, which I think still has strengths to it. For platform regulation, and moderation, the strength is it could address upstream exposure, which event platform data indicates is a problem. But also it kind of enforces these challenges, and there's also some free speech concerns and potential for platform pushback. And then it's also hard to detect certain nuanced content, and it's certain things would still slip through the cracks. Um, in terms of like clinical community support, a strength is that it would be targeted help for those already experiencing harm. Um, However, as we know, there's a lot of health system access inequalities. Um, and in some senses, it doesn't prevent new cases. However, I think kind of the bigger problem is the access to inequalities because I feel like once you start to treat it, then already there's less problems to be presented, and thus I still think that like new cases would lower slightly. And then lastly, for diverse representation, um, experimental evidence suggests immediate positive effects, and also, um, however, like it still kind of gives this representation without power. Industry motives are still profit driven. Um, yeah. Briefly, just like evaluation kind of in terms of like measured success. Um, in terms of like quantitative measurements, um, there's been changes in body satisfaction scales, rates of disordered eating, and engagement with harmful content. Um, and it's shown that mixed methods are really important in measuring this success. Okay, finally, my sociological takeaways. I highlighted, I think, my key closing words: teach, regulate, diversify, and support. Um, Media-driven beauty norms are socially constructed, maintained through interaction, and institutional forces like symbolic interactionalism and conflict theory, that both add um, like these insights. Multi-level solutions are required. Education, industry change, regulation, and support are all necessary. That's why I chose to highlight them. And it's important to center equity. Different communities experience body image differently. Solutions have to be culturally responsive. There's not just one solution to be flushed out and cure everything. Um, Yeah, to close my bottom line, my claim is media shapes how we see our bodies, but thoughtful, multi-level, and equitable strategies can help create a healthier relationship with body image. Um, yeah, these are my references. Thank you.